Okay, let's move into the panel. I'm going to introduce the three panelists just to give you a sense of their backgrounds, so you understand a little bit better the perspective that they're bringing to their responses. And today we're going to be talking about scaling industrial data ops and its lessons from the field. So this is real life. These are stories we're going to be sharing and telling, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions too. So first I'll start with Brian. Usually I just call you Brian Z, but the reality is you're
that's easier.
Zakrajsek. I just don't use the J.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Brian's a specialist leader and senior manager at Deloitte, focused on the firm's U.S. smart manufacturing offering. Brian's responsible for architecture strategy and execution for a portfolio of leading global manufacturing and operations clients. Brings more than 20 years of experience with, it was really fun actually looking at your resume, like process control, system architecture, digital engineering to today's panel. So it should be very good. John Harrington, you've heard from him several times already today, so I don't need to give him much of an introduction, but he's Chief Product Officer at HighByte, and he's worked in manufacturing software and also worked for manufacturers. And he's currently responsible at HighByte for our customer and partner success. So it gives him a nice overview of what he sees nearly 100 different customers doing. And then finally, Andrew Davis from MSA Safety. MSA Safety is the world's leading manufacturer of safety products designed to protect people and facility infrastructures globally. And the company has really been on a digital transformation journey for especially the last several years. And I'm excited for you all to hear about that more today. So I'm going to start with Andrew. I'll pick on you first. How about you tell us a little bit more about the company, your role, and what data management projects you're prioritizing right now?
My name's Andrew Davis. I'm a digital manufacturing engineer at MSA Safety. MSA Safety's purpose is to keep workers safe. We make a variety of safety products, everything from SCBAs for firefighters to gas detection to even hard hats. As a digital manufacturing engineer there, I'm involved in the implementation of digital systems and software to support manufacturing on the shop floor. Over the last 2 years, we've been on a digital transformation journey, and we've done a couple proof of concepts, and now we're looking to scale. We have a high mix and a relatively low volume of products, which can make this challenging. So we chose different types of lines for these proof of concepts. An example of this is that we have SMT lines, which make circuit boards, to manual assembly lines. From the beginning, we knew we wanted to scale this process, so we tried to put our best foot forward and started deploying our infrastructure with AWS Greengrass and incorporated HighByte from the very beginning. The purpose for all of this is for continuous improvement. We have a lot of very legacy and specific systems that answer really technical engineering questions, but sometimes the larger questions, such as how am I running to my schedule right now, is more difficult to answer without doing a lot of manual talking to people, basically, I guess. And so we are focused on that. The main KPI that we want everyone to look at is this KPI called productivity, or OLE, which is basically we are integrating with these legacy systems for a given time period. We look at an outfeed count times the expected time and compare that to the actual labor time, so you can see if you're operating to your plan in real time. So that's a little bit about what we've been up to the last couple of years.
That's great. I'm just going to double click on that and ask you something right back. And then I promise I'll get over to Brian and John. What's motivating your team to adopt what we would call a data ops approach? What are the internal business drivers? You just named one of those KPIs, but can you just elaborate a little more?
Yeah, I think it's because we have a long-term vision for the future of where we want to take this, basically. And some of the things are the visibility, the ability to iterate quickly as we learn new things, and the flexibility and the ability to abstract away problems and do things temporarily that we know that we're going to go back and replace as we become essentially better at doing our job. When I started working up the river at a steel mill. I was like essentially in maintenance there, and they had all vintages of equipment there, and everything from the 50s to modern day. And the equipment from the 50s had like physical relay panels that you'd have to walk into front of to troubleshoot, and you'd have to ask the operator and pretend like you were Columbo or whatever to figure out what happened. And the new stuff, you could have like a PLC and like look in a historian and like have actual data to solve your problems, and you could do stuff so much more quickly and more like agilely, and like make actual improvements that don't involve rewiring a 50-year-old mill. And when I saw or heard about like HighByte and like the DataOps approach, it like intuitively made sense to me, because it was taking like what was invisible and making it more visible, so that you can more quickly do things, basically, or solve business problems. Yeah.
That's great. Brian, I'll go to you. So thinking about your vast portfolio, what are like the broader industry drivers you see among them? Why DataOps?
Yeah, so I think, so Andrew hit on probably the number one that I keep seeing, which is we're at least 10 years into this Industry 4.0 transformation, and I don't really see an end in there. And there's just so much ambition that folks want to do, so many use cases or things they want to accomplish, and these pain points don't go away. And so I think as the funnel keeps filling up, there's still just this heavy amount of ambition that happens. And then what happened over the last 2 years, right? Generative AI and all of these agentic frameworks have like really just kind of poured fuel on really like executive leadership down sort of initiatives. And so when we start thinking about how can we use AI and to drive not just data connectivity, but like process optimization into some of this, that's forcing, a lot of infrastructures to come around. And then, I think the macro that just doesn't go away is we're still connected to this physical world. We have physical assets that we know are creating very important amounts of data, and we're either collecting them and not using them effectively, or they are siloed. And so I think with that dynamic, some of those are consistent, but some of those are accelerating in a way that, here in almost the end of 2025, right? It's accelerating the need for these middleware tools and infrastructure to do things better.
John, you want to add on to that?
I got to add on.
Like why HighByte?
Well, I think one interesting thing that we're also seeing is as we're trying to break down the silos that we put in place 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, we're also seeing all these new silos popping up. And so like AGVs is a perfect example of, a lot of companies are implementing AGVs, and they're very powerful automated guided vehicles. In fact, they may be using 2 or 3 different brands within a single factory, because some of them are good for lifting heavy things, some are light things, some are in certain areas, and some are better in other areas. But all of a sudden, that's become 2 or 3 different more silos of data. And those specifically are not connected to your industrial automation network, because they are completely different. Many of them are API based or have brokers or things like that on them. So it's robots are the same way. Additive manufacturing is the same way. We're seeing this new technology coming in, and it speaks a different language, and it's not connected to the other stuff. So as we're trying to progress ourselves into the future and break down those silos, there are new ones popping up. And, that's where we're seeing Intelligence Hub just getting more and more valuable to the customer base, because they want to, as Brian said, they want to adopt this new technology. But it's like every time you take one step forward, they're finding that they're like 2 steps back. I guess the other thing that I would add to this is what I had said earlier today, which is the biggest bottleneck. Like most companies can come up with 50 or 100 different use cases or projects that they want to do. Many of them even have funding for them. The biggest struggle that they deal with is the teams. They don't have the teams to implement them. And, the IT and the OT teams are focused on getting product out the door, keeping systems up and running, and they just don't have the capacity. The advantage, actually, one of the reasons that we work with Deloitte is because they can bring that team in. So they can bring that team into a company and land it at multiple different sites very quickly, as you heard with FedEx. But making that much more effective and efficient is where we see the huge opportunity. because a lot of times the corporate has great ambitions, but when you get out to a site, they just don't have the capacity to implement it.
So I heard you say as some of the challenges, data silos and resource constraints. I'm going to go to you, Brian, and maybe you can elaborate on that. What do you think is holding back manufacturers from adopting and making progress on their goals?
Yeah, so I think, and again, I think we all live in our the worlds of what we know, and I think when I look across this is a room of people that are highly focused around that OT IT middle, right, in industrial data. And if I open up my LinkedIn every day, you'd think like that's the only thing happening sometimes. But what I actually find is that
it's my life.
We'll go to the bar later and see what people say.
Sure.
But what I think when I talk to both leaders and managers and even like frontline workers, the awareness of some of the tool sets that have evolved over the last like 5 years specifically is pretty limited, right? And so I think sometimes like getting the word out isn't happening at the rate that could actually affect change. And so this is also a technology I found painfully through client experiences, is like we have to show and not tell, right? And so there are some examples around starting small, and you keep kind of hearing that, but I think those are possible solves that I've seen successful over that. I think one of the other just trade-offs is like corporate IT departments, who are often the folks that are typically funding manufacturing IT transformations, are still kind of burdened by cost reduction, procurement processes, justifying adding new tech to the stack, a year to add a new vendor to a procurement cycle. Like these are like really big in security, right? And security is a good thing, but it also creates friction in the buying process. So I think these are some of the things that do hold us back in a tactical way, but also just the current kind of awareness.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Andrew, what would you say at MSA Safety is like some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, that matches my experience. I think that we have like a large and varied product line and a lot of different plants. So there's a lot of variability also in like the skills, the processes and the technologies that people are using. And if you want to like unify things and like develop standards around processes, that involves like a lot of like learning, both as an individual, whether you're like learning about Docker or whatever, or like organizational learners or learning. So like the OT department can learn how to work with the IT department and to solve your problems. So yeah, I think that it's like a big learning thing essentially, and that takes time and patience, and it's a big effort to learn something new.
How do you, Andrew, just to build on that, how do you help, and I asked this question of Kevin earlier too, I'm just interested in it, like how do you help management leadership understand the value of something that can be so intangible, like infrastructure or middleware? How do you promote these concepts internally?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the PLC analogy, if it was like 1970, it'd be a tough sell to like get your boss to make the next piece of equipment with a PLC instead of a relay panel. I think that these concepts are all like new. I think that demonstration again is like the best way, when you can do the work that you're doing and like leave it documented so that other people can go behind, and like you can break big problems into smaller problems that other people can take on and like continue working on. That's like really the value of the tools in my mind.
That's great. John, do you have anything you wanted to add on to that in terms of overcoming challenges in the space for data management and operations?
You caught me on that one.
You're like deep in thought on something else.
I mean, I agree with all of them. I think Brian actually triggered me when he said the procurement duration in the number of experiences that we've had where companies, decide on a solution and then spend the next 9 to 18 months trying to get through procurement. So there's a lot of red tape there, but fundamentally, I think that the DataOps approach abstracts away, from a technology standpoint, it it doesn't say replace your existing stuff. Leave that in place and don't even reprogram it. I'll tell you, I've heard of companies that said that they're going to go and reprogram every PLC with an MQTT or with an MQTT client so that they can publish out data. And I just think that's a crazy approach. Leave the equipment the way it is. Put in an abstraction layer and enable yourselves to consume the data the way that the existing system, whether it's an MES system or PLC or something in the cloud, the way that it's supposed to consume the data, but then have that abstraction layer that you can transform it to deliver what you need. Because going and changing all of the brownfield equipment is it'll never end, and it will always be really challenging. But
you just hit the nail on something. So talking a little bit, and you showed some architectural patterns today. So Brian, I'll ask you, as like the market's evolving, what kind of integration strategies are you seeing work well? And that could be anything from the things John shared today around UNS concepts or data fabric.
Yeah, I'll probably step back just a little bit just to like architecture in general. I do think that I am seeing an influx over the last maybe 18 months of folks just really revisiting their edge to cloud architecture, right? I think there were a lot of straight shot pipelines that kind of like showed up 5+ years ago. And I think folks are getting really in the weeds and in the details on how they think about architecture. And I think one of the ways that often works well is to think about these hybrid architectures, right? Kind of just leave what's in place currently, stand up a parallel architecture that is maybe more modern, maybe uses different tools, takes a different route that doesn't affect the production network. And once you get like better trust along that, that seems to be a good path because you sort of avoid, again, some of those friction points that I talked about. That said, I think sometimes this concept of unified namespace gets us in a little bit of trouble, right? Because it shows this node that spokes out and it sort of almost like oversimplifies what happens in the real world. Because we have kind of a couple of things, like all of these patterns that exist in IT are shifting left, right? And so this node-based approach, we hear, the leverage of knowledge graphs. We hear, real-time APIs at the plant floor is another place where we're seeing a lot of folks doing that have to traverse the DMZ and move to cloud and come back. And so balancing out these various approaches in a way that's cost-effective, brings value to your businesses is a non-trivial ask. So I do think, again, kind of working to the side until you can understand the trade-offs is a helpful approach before you scale and go to production, right?
I think it shows value quickly, as opposed to if you have to go and wipe out everything just to make progress. It's a massive project. It's something, so it's harder to get approval for it. But if you can start small on the side, then you can start showing value and then grow that. Yeah.
Andrew, what's your architecture like at MSA Safety? And I'll kind of ask you two questions there. A little bit about architecture, and then earlier you mentioned HighByte. So you talk a little bit about your architecture, and then also specifically why you chose HighByte to be part of that architecture.
Yeah, so our architectures, we have HighByte involved, and then we have Ignition, and we're using HighByte to contextualize information and send it to the site-wise in one of our proof of concept cases. And it's indeterminate where we're going to put that information long-term, but tools like HighByte allow you to have the flexibility to not have to make those long-term decisions. You can go back and rework these things very easily, basically. And that's where we're at right now. Yeah.
John, anything you wanted to add, just looking across broadly our customer base of patterns that you see emerging, architectural patterns? I mean, you shared some earlier today, but where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think I'm going to key off of Brian's comment of it used to be that people were just having all of these direct pipelines up into the cloud. Those are challenging. I think, we're seeing customers deploy Intelligence Hub in the OT network. We're seeing them deploy us in the IT network and routing data through firewalls to get across. we're seeing a lot of connectivity there. So, people are talking about mesh networks or, data meshes. They're talking about data fabrics. They're talking about unified namespace. I actually think that we're kind of in a hybrid environment of taking the advantage of a data mesh where you're creating data products at the edge, taking the advantage of a data fabric where you're consolidating the data, and a UNS where you're kind of routing it through, and you can merge them all together and you end up with what we're doing today. So it's certainly exciting times, and we rely on guys like Brian to tell us where we're going.
It's all circular. I learned from you, you learned from me, and then circular reference.
You tee up the last question I have, and then we'll turn it over to your own questions. But speaking of the future, we'll talk about maybe what's next. So, Andrew, I'll ask you, what are your future goals that you're working on at MSA?
Yeah, so we're looking forward to scaling out our existing solutions across more facilities. More long term, we have a lot of product data from the field, and we're looking for ways that we can more standardize our data collection from the existing legacy systems to be able to more quickly correlate, I guess, the data between these two systems. And that's pretty exciting. And then in the more near term, it sounds like we're going to do some MCP experiments based on the presentation here. So again, that's pretty exciting stuff.
Brian, what are you seeing? Where's the market headed?
Yeah, maybe I'll try to speak from a Deloitte perspective. I think we're moving from a place of digitalization and automation to, autonomous workflows. And so we tend to work with all maturities, but I would say, we tend to work most often with the more progressive folks that are trying to see the future. And so a lot of work in trying to enable these agentic architectures to work in production on real use cases, right? Leveraging the factory as an API and, taking these buzzwords and putting them into reality. I think, again, I want to call back, things like knowledge graphs, things like in-memory databases, time series databases. There's a tremendous amount of innovation going on in data storage and data handling. And so as we maybe use knowledge graphs to point us to where the data is, to store it in the right way, to create these high performance architectures that just work and abstract away all that complexity, most of our enterprise clients are at least at a maturity where they're aware of all these pieces and they're trying to put all this together and then lay process and abstraction on top of it so that, their employees are not aware of what's going on. And I think we heard that earlier on, what's the definition of a unified namespace? They should know about it. Right. And so I think, that is the end goal. And so, but there's a lot of plumbing that goes on under the hood. So
I'll ask you too. Where do you see our customers going?
So I think that we try to balance the autonomous AI future with what can someone from MSA do tomorrow to add value, or someone from US Steel, or someone from Gojo, or someone from, I can't name every company that's in here because I'm not sure of all of them, Pfizer. But, what can you do today? Because the AI stuff is something that you need to be thinking about and reaching for. But we're trying to balance that with how can we help you get a little bit better at, reducing the amount of defects or improving the yield of your business by getting access to data. And, it's funny, autonomous agents is awesome, but in some cases, just giving a quality engineer immediate access to when a defect shows up and what line that is so that they can immediately look at what were the process parameters that were collected over the last 30 minutes and get that data. They don't even need the AI agent yet. That would put them light years ahead of where they are today. So just moving that data and making that accessible is key, but also preparing everyone for the autonomous agent environment, which really, I do agree with the very first presentation, which was, these aren't replacing humans. They're making us far more capable. They're able to analyze so much more data so much faster so that they can guide us where to go. What do we need to address today? Because it can analyze, massive volumes of data. So it's exciting.
All right. Thanks, guys. Anna, I'm going to hand you this mic. We have about 10 minutes for questions, if you wouldn't mind circulating.
Option 2 is we could just ask you all what's next and then put the mic in your hand and you'll have to tell us. So
Option 3 is the bar. The bar is right behind.
Or option 3 is don't listen to me. I guess because there's both an end user and SI in the panel, I guess what I'm curious to know is with all this new technology and all the additional ambition, what do we think is like a good model or a good relationship between manufacturer and SI today versus maybe how it's been in the past? If that's too abstract of a question, if you want to riff off of that's fine, but I'm just curious about is what do we think is a good working model?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's got to be a partnership. A lot of the times you're learning a lot about your process because in my experience, at least, you've never looked at your processes from an angle of wanting to digitize them before. So MSA is going to be learning, and so is the systems integrator at the same time. So to be very collaborative, I think is one of the most important things, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just comment based on kind of where we sit. And, as a consulting and integration firm, we do a blend of strategy and implementation work and operate structures. And so sometimes manufacturers just need help understanding the market, right? I think from a technology strategy perspective, we actually get quite a few strategy opportunities there because folks are not able to process as much technology is coming in and really slot it into how to make the right decisions that will enable the value on the business side. From the implementation, when you sort of get to that pilot phase, you need sort of an acceleration so that you can take something that's a little bit more abstract with tools that you're not familiar with and take that small pilot and move it quickly. And so sometimes we go hands-on and sometimes we sort of guide, and sometimes we're heavy lift, and sometimes we're shared teams. There's all sorts of ways, but I think thinking about in a partnership scenario, what do we do well? What do we know, and what do we not know? I think finding those partners that can help solve that for you, whether it's a local integrator, a consulting firm. I see a lot of manufacturing peers talking across levels, even inside of their same industries in some cases. So that partnership model, I think we talk about it a lot, but it's really important, right?
I think from a vendor, working with system integrators, we see them as a huge source of information, of knowledge themselves, but we also see them look to leverage them for scale. And, like I said earlier, many companies don't have the capacity to roll these sort of projects out, and the system integrator can bring in highly knowledgeable people, and they can spread them across the country or across the globe very quickly and very efficiently. So it becomes a really powerful scale mechanism, and so we're often setting up relationships with them to be able to work with the customer and scale things out.
More of a generic high-level question is where as an industry are we at on that journey? Are a lot of people engaged in this in the moment? Is anybody sort of on the other side of it or at that advanced edge? And then how much of it is people still just waiting to get in?
Yes. Who you asking?
Kevin, you want me or
Brian's
me or John?
probably be the first to answer that. But I'm sure, John, you probably see it as well.
So I don't know. Here's the dirty secret. I think a lot of people are at parity, right? I think a lot of people are in various forms of success in various parts of their business. And actually, with large enterprises, you'll sometimes see that one business is really advanced and they either have a different process or they don't talk. And so some people will be above that. I would say from an industry level, the places where I see the folks are moving the fastest, and it actually kind of reflects in HighByte's, in your NASCAR, slides too. The companies that are the most technically dense currently, they have the most data and the most systems that have to interoperate, have sort of accelerated into this. They have the problem, so they need to solve it. I do think sometimes we see some lower maturity companies that are still working their way through Industry 3.0, and they start to jump towards this. And I think sometimes you have to kind of build your infrastructure in a stepwise fashion to get there. But I do see life sciences do that. They're high compliance. They don't move at the same speed as some other industries, but that's one. Semiconductor, oil and gas, lots of data, lots of opportunity, little lower on the compliance scale. So I think, those are there. And then I think I would also say like just some of the tech adoptions, just use case specific, right? Same way with life sciences. If you have high quality, high compliance, high risk, expensive things, all of a sudden that funding unlocks to find the better way to use the right tools, use the right tech, bring in the integration teams to go figure it out.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd add is a lot of people ask us, what industries are you successful in? And, what are your biggest industries? And it's interesting that we've got customers that really span. That we've got automotive OEMs who are customers and industrial products, like bearing manufacturers. We've got metals, mining and metal steel companies and alloy companies. And we've got food and beverage companies. And we've got continuous process, oil and gas and chemicals and utilities even. And of course, package distribution companies. So a really wide range. I think the DataOps is on our customers tend to be early adopters, and I think that the market is going through this phase. I would say that we're kind of in the chasm right now of moving from the really early adopters into what's often termed the early majority. And we've got people on both sides, but that's also why system integrators are so powerful, because when you get into the majority, they tend to use more system integrators. The early adopters have the teams internally that can do the work. The majority work with third parties to do it. So yeah, it's not so much an industry. It's definitely wide range, but it tends to be the early adopters that we're working with. But I also agree with Brian that the range even within a single factory can be mind-boggling. That one area can be highly progressive and one area can be really behind, and trying to help them out is interesting. So
maybe I'll just pull it back away from industry and say one thing that is like an absolute certainty is that the folks that have been successful, and I think that are at the scale that they might work with a Deloitte to do something like this, is you do have that awareness that lives at multiple levels, and it might not be broad, but it's at least vertical. And so you have some folks that are influencing very successful, oftentimes frontline folks working in facilities. You have leadership that have trust in these high performance teams, and they're willing to oftentimes extract these folks like out of the plants, literally take them out of their, they're providing tremendous amount of value on the front line. They'll take them out and put them on these initiatives. And I see this pattern like pretty frequently, and it's probably a tough sell between the plant and the central teams, but to pull these really high performing, execution roles forward to go drive some of these, and with the support of their leadership, is like almost 100% tie-in. So like this, it's a culture thing too, I think. That rolls around innovation and how you look at talent. So.
Did you want to add it?
Oh no, that was like good, guys. I don't think I could top that one, but yeah, no, that's great work. Yeah.
Andrew, I think I'll just ask one little question and then we'll wrap this up to you. Any advice you would give other manufacturers in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I guess these projects are very difficult, I would say. You're basically, in our case, we want everyone to look at a single KPI, and that involves like a broad agreement on what constitutes a good or a bad day, basically. And whether you're like an engineer or an operator or a plant manager, those could be like radically different. So, it's a lot of change management, I would say, and changing your culture so that everybody can agree on what the vision is for the future and how we should operate, in addition to all of like the technical plumbing with like HighByte and stuff.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.